As dawn broke on June 22, 1944, the Belarusian front erupted in a thunderous roar. Over 32,000 Soviet artillery pieces unleashed their fury upon the German lines, marking the start of Operation Bagration. 3 years earlier, Nazi Germany had unleashed Operation Barbarossa, driving deep into Soviet territory along a front stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Now, with Allied forces having landed in Normandy just weeks before, the Soviets saw their chance to deliver a crushing blow on the Eastern Front that could decide the war. It was a barrage of unprecedented scale. One German soldier remarked, quote, "It was as if the earth itself had erupted." The ground shook as 4,000 tanks and 4,800 aircraft joined the assault, dwarfing the German forces' 495 tanks and 602 aircraft. This overwhelming force represented the Soviet Union's determination to end the Nazi occupation once and for all. If successful, Operation Bagration would shatter the German Army Group Center, potentially opening the path to Berlin itself. It would liberate vast swathes of Soviet territory, including all of Belarus, and demonstrate to the world that the Red Army had become a formidable offensive fighting force. Failure, on the other hand, could prolong the war by months or even years, allowing the Nazis to reinforce their positions and potentially negotiate a separate peace with the Western Allies. Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky, commander of the First Belarusian Front, watched intently as his bold plan unfolded. His weathered face, bearing the scars of past battles and imprisonment, showed grim determination. Against Stalin's initial disagreement, Rokossovsky had insisted on a multi-pronged approach to destroy the Army Group Center. He had promised Stalin, who had once imprisoned him, quote, "The operation will be a success." As the colossal bombardment subsided, over 1.6 million Soviet troops surged forward against the badly outnumbered German Army Group Center. Their objective, to liberate Minsk and drive the Wehrmacht from Belarus, potentially delivering a blow from which Nazi Germany might never recover. Yet the Germans were far from beaten. Field Marshal Walter Model, the newly appointed commander of Army Group Center and Hitler's famed fireman for critical situations, was a master of defensive warfare. As Soviet forces advanced, he frantically worked to establish a new defensive line. If Model could halt the Soviet advance, it might give Germany the breathing room it desperately needed to regroup and continue the fight. The fate of the Eastern Front, and perhaps the war itself, hung in the balance. As the Red Army pushed westward, their supply lines stretching thin and the summer heat taking its toll, the largest Soviet operation of World War II was about to reach its climax. As the summer of 1944 approached, the tide of World War II had decisively turned against Nazi Germany. In the West, the Allied forces were poised to launch Operation Overlord, the long-awaited invasion of France. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Red Army had been pushing the Wehrmacht back for over a year, liberating much of Ukraine and breaking the siege of Leningrad. Yet despite these setbacks, Germany still occupied vast swathes of Soviet territory, including the entirety of Byelorussia in modern-day Belarus. The Soviet High Command, the Stavka, saw an opportunity to deliver a crushing blow to the German Army Group Center, which held a bulging salient in Byelorussia. This operation, codenamed Bagration, after a Georgian prince who had fought Napoleon, aimed to liberate Minsk and drive the Germans from Byelorussia. More ambitiously, it sought to destroy the Army Group Center entirely, potentially dealing a fatal blow to Germany's ability to continue the war in the East. Leading the Soviet forces was a cadre of experienced commanders. Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky, a survivor of Stalin's purges who had proven his worth at Kursk and in Ukraine, commanded the First Belarusian Front. Alongside him, General Ivan Chernyakhovsky led the 3rd Belarusian Front, while General Ivan Bagramian commanded the 1st Baltic Front. These men had over 1.6 million troops, 32,000 artillery pieces, 5,800 tanks, and 7,800 aircraft at their disposal. The German Army Group Center was ready to face them, led by Field Marshal Ernst Busch. The Germans had approximately 800,000 men in the region, but were severely outgunned, with only 495 tanks and 602 aircraft. Despite the disparity in forces, Hitler had ordered a rigid defense, designating key cities as Festplätze, or fortified places to be held at all costs. The battlefield itself was a mix of dense forests, vast marshlands, and open plains, crisscrossed by several major rivers, including the Dnieper and Berezina. The Germans had spent months fortifying their positions, creating multiple trench lines and extensive minefields. However, they had critically underestimated the Soviet strength, believing the main offensive would come further south in Ukraine. As June 22nd approached, a date chosen for its symbolic value as the 3rd anniversary of Operation Barbarossa, tension mounted on both sides. The stakes could not have been higher. For the Soviets, Operation Bagration represented a chance to deal a decisive blow to the Nazi war machine and begin the final drive toward Berlin. For the Germans, it was a desperate fight for survival, knowing that a defeat here could spell the end of their ambitions in the East and eventually the end of the Third Reich. As the sun set on June 21, 1944, an uneasy calm settled over the Belarusian front. Soldiers on both sides tried to snatch a few hours of sleep in bunkers and trenches along the line. They knew that, with dawn, one of the largest and most consequential battles in the history of warfare would come. The opening phase of Operation Bagration began on June 22, 1944, with a massive artillery barrage that shook the earth along the entire front. Over 32,000 Soviet artillery pieces unleashed a devastating bombardment on German positions, signaling the start of what would become one of the largest offensives in military history. The storm of artillery was like nothing the Germans had ever seen. It was a nightmare come to life. A Wehrmacht officer captured near Vitebsk later recalled, quote, "It was as if the earth itself had erupted. The artillery barrage seemed endless, and when it lifted, we saw waves of tanks and infantry emerging from the smoke. We knew then that the end was near." The Soviet strategy, based on their deep battle doctrine, involved multiple breakthrough attempts along the front to confuse and overwhelm the German defenders. This approach, pioneered by Soviet generals like Vladimir Triandafilov and Mikhail Tukhachevsky in the 1920s and 1930s, aimed to penetrate the enemy's operational depth, disrupting their ability to mount a cohesive defense. Rokossovsky's 1st Belarusian Front launched a two-pronged assault, with one force striking from Rogachev and another from Parichi. This plan, which Rokossovsky had stubbornly insisted on despite initial disagreement from Stalin, proved highly effective. In the air, the Soviet advantage was overwhelming. With 7,799 aircraft against Germany's 602, they quickly established air superiority. Soviet Il-2 Sturmovik ground attack aircraft strafed and bombed German columns while fighters kept the Luftwaffe at bay. Hitler, adhering to his no-retreat policy, had ordered the Army Group Center to stand firm and not abandon its fortified cities under any circumstances. This rigid defense played into Soviet hands, allowing them to encircle large German formations in swift pincer maneuvers. Field Marshal Ernst Busch, commanding Army Group Center, was slow to recognize the scale of the Soviet offensive, believing it to be a feint. Stalin, on the other hand, was cautious in his expectations. The Soviets had overestimated German strength, believing they faced 850,000 troops, the number of men assigned to the army group, when in reality, the combat strength of the army group center was only about half that. This overestimation led to a massive Soviet buildup that ultimately proved decisive. A crucial element in the Soviet success was the role of partisans. On the night of June 19th, Soviet partisans launched a coordinated attack on German rear areas, detonating thousands of explosives on railroads and bridges. This rail war severely hampered German mobility and resupply efforts, contributing significantly to the coming encirclements. As the offensive unfolded, the Soviets made rapid progress. By June 25th, they had broken through in multiple sectors. The German Ninth Army, defending Bobruisk, found itself quickly encircled. In the north, the 3rd Panzer Army was pushed back from Vitebsk, another designated fortified place. The scale of the Soviet offensive became clear as it progressed. With over 2.3 million troops engaged and 4 Soviet fronts advancing simultaneously, it was an unprecedented logistical and strategic feat. The offensive's success was in its planning and execution, showcasing the Red Army's growing prowess in combined arms warfare. As the first week of the offensive drew to a close, the true extent of the disaster facing the Army Group Center was becoming apparent. Hitler, realizing the gravity of the situation, dismissed Busch on June 28th, replacing him with Field Marshal Walter Model, known as his fireman for crisis management. The stage was set for the next phase of the battle. As Soviet forces pressed their advantage, the question remained: could the Germans stabilize the front, or was the Army Group Center doomed to destruction? The success of Operation Bagration owed much to the Soviets' masterful use of their Maskirovka doctrine of military deception. This strategy, refined through years of warfare, played a crucial role in misleading the German High Command about the true nature and scale of the impending offensive. One of the key elements of the Soviet deception was convincing the Germans that the main thrust of their summer offensive would occur in Ukraine against Army Group North Ukraine, not in Belarus against Army Group Center. To sell this illusion, the Soviets conducted elaborate false troop movements and radio traffic in the south. This ruse was so effective that even as late as the 3rd day of Bagration, the German High Command was still focused on the threat to Ukraine. The Soviets took extraordinary measures to conceal their actual buildup in Belarus. Civilian populations were evacuated from frontline areas to minimize the risk of information leaks. Strict radio silence was enforced among the assembling troops, with orders transmitted by courier instead. Soviet staff officers personally flew over positions to ensure proper camouflage was in place. These efforts paid off handsomely. The Germans not only misidentified the location of the main offensive, but also grossly underestimated the forces arrayed against them. While the Soviets had amassed over 1.6 million troops, 32,000 artillery pieces, and 5,800 tanks, German intelligence believed they faced a much smaller force. The impact of this deception was profound. The Germans had shifted significant forces to Army Group North Ukraine, including most of their armor, leaving Army Group Center critically under strength when the offensive began. The Soviets also employed tactical deception within the battlefield itself. They often made small probing attacks to test German defenses and then rapidly reinforced successful breakthroughs, keeping the Germans guessing where the main effort would fall. The results of these deception strategies were devastating for the Germans. Within days of the offensive's start, massive gaps had opened in the German lines. Entire battalions found themselves encircled, cut off from supplies and reinforcement. The Germans, having prepared for an attack that never came in Ukraine, were left scrambling to respond to the real threat in Belarus. By the time the German High Command realized the true nature of the Soviet offensive, it was too late. The rigid defense ordered by Hitler, based on flawed intelligence, had played right into Soviet hands. Cities designated as fortresses to be held at all costs became traps for their defenders. The success of Maskirovka in Operation Bagration allowed the Soviets to achieve tactical and strategic surprise on a massive scale. The Germans, masters of blitzkrieg warfare early in the war, found themselves outmaneuvered and overwhelmed by an adversary they had gravely underestimated. The Operation Bagration offensive unfolded through a series of coordinated attacks, each contributing to the overall collapse of the Army Group Center. The Vitebsk-Orsha offensive, spearheaded by the 1st Baltic Front and 3rd Belorussian Front, began on June 23rd. They had encircled Vitebsk within days, trapping the entire German 53rd Corps. A Soviet veteran later recalled, quote, "The Germans fought fiercely, but we could sense their desperation. They knew they were cut off." Simultaneously, the Mogilev offensive pinned down the German Fourth Army, while the Bobruisk offensive, led by Rokossovsky's 1st Belarusian Front, encircled the German Ninth Army. The success at Bobruisk was particularly notable, with Lieutenant General Isa Pliev's cavalry mechanized group demonstrating the effectiveness of the Soviet deep battle doctrine. A German officer captured during this phase remarked, quote, "We never imagined they could move so fast. One moment we were holding the line, the next we were surrounded." As these initial offensives succeeded, the Soviets launched the Minsk offensive on June 29th. The rapid advance caught many German units off guard. A Soviet tank commander described the scene, quote, "We drove for days, passing endless columns of abandoned German vehicles. The scale of their defeat was almost beyond comprehension." The human cost of these operations was immense. Villages and towns along the path of the offensive bore witness to both the brutality of occupation and the chaos of retreat. A Belarusian civilian, liberated during the Minsk offensive, recounted his impression, quote, "When the Soviets arrived, we emerged from hiding to find our world transformed. The streets were littered with debris and bodies, both German and Soviet." The Polotsk offensive, launched on June 29th, aimed to screen the northern flank of the main thrust. Its success further disrupted German attempts to stabilize their line. Meanwhile, the Šiauliai offensive, beginning on July 5th, pushed towards the Baltic coast, threatening to cut off Army Group North entirely. Throughout these operations, the Soviet use of Maskirovka continued to pay dividends. German reinforcements were often sent to the wrong locations, arriving too late to affect the battle's outcome. Field Marshal Model, struggling to make sense of the rapidly deteriorating situation, was described by his staff as working to the point of exhaustion. His headquarters a hive of frantic activity as reports of fresh disasters poured in. Starting on July 5th, the Vilnius offensive led to a dramatic urban battle. The city's capture was marked by cooperation between Soviet forces and Polish resistance fighters, though this alliance would prove short-lived. A Polish partisan remembered, quote, "For a brief moment we fought alongside the Soviets, united against a common enemy. But even then, we sensed the complicated future that awaited us." As July progressed, the momentum of the Soviet advance seemed unstoppable. The Belostok offensive cleared western Belarus, while the Lublin-Brest offensive pushed into eastern Poland. Each successful operation further unraveled the German defenses, creating a cascade of collapsing fronts. The human drama of these offensives was played out countless times. In the desperation of encircled German units, The determination of Soviet troops pushing forward despite exhaustion, and the mixed emotions of civilians caught between retreating occupiers and advancing liberators. By the end of July, the success of these coordinated offensives had utterly transformed the Eastern Front. Army Group Center had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force, and Soviet armies were poised to strike at the borders of East Prussia and Warsaw. The question now was not if the Germans could hold in the east, but how much longer they could continue the war at all. The aftermath of Operation Bagration was nothing short of cataclysmic for Nazi Germany. In just 2 months, the Soviet offensive had utterly shattered the Army Group Center, inflicting what many historians consider to be the most catastrophic defeat suffered by German arms in World War II. When seen in numbers, not even D-Day compares to how catastrophic this battle was. German casualties were enormous, with estimates ranging from 350,000 to 400,000 lost, missing, or wounded. The Soviets claimed to have taken 158,000 prisoners, including 22 generals. Material losses were equally devastating, with thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft destroyed or captured. In a symbolic display of the magnitude of their victory, the Soviets paraded 57,000 German prisoners through the streets of Moscow, a spectacle that took 90 minutes to pass. For the Soviet Union, victory came at a heavy price. They suffered approximately 180,000 lost and missing, with nearly 600,000 wounded. Yet, unlike the Germans, the Soviets could replace these losses, their manpower reserves and industrial capacity far outstripping those of their enemies. The strategic consequences of Bagration were far-reaching. The Soviet advance had pushed to East Prussia's borders and Warsaw's outskirts. Army Group North was left isolated in the Baltic states, while Army Group North Ukraine was exposed to flanking attacks. The Germans were forced to transfer armored units from the Western Front, weakening their ability to counter the Allied advance following the Normandy landings. Perhaps most significantly, Bagration demonstrated that the Red Army had evolved into an unstoppable fighting force capable of conducting complex, large-scale operations. The successful use of maskirovka, combined arms tactics, and the deep battle doctrine showcased a level of military sophistication that caught many observers, including some in the West, by surprise. The human cost of the offensive left deep scars across Belarus and eastern Poland. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble, and vast swathes of countryside laid waste. The civilian population, already devastated by years of occupation, faced the daunting task of rebuilding their shattered lives. For many Soviet soldiers, Bagration marked a turning point in their war experience. A Red Army veteran later wrote, quote, "After Bagration, we knew the war was won. The road to Berlin lay open before us, and nothing could stop us now." In Germany, the scale of the defeat sent shockwaves through the military and political leadership. It became increasingly clear that the war was lost, though Hitler and his inner circle refused to accept this reality. The failed July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler, occurring amid the Bagration disaster, reflected the growing desperation among some German elites. In the annals of military history, Operation Bagration is studied for its use of deception, coordination of multiple fronts, and successful implementation of deep battle theory. It remains one of the largest and most successful military operations ever conducted. As the dust settled on the battlefields of Belarus in the summer of 1944, the world witnessed a seismic shift in the balance of power. The Wehrmacht, once thought invincible, had been dealt a blow from which it would never recover. The Soviet Union, at a terrible cost, had asserted itself as a military superpower, and the endgame of World War II in Europe, though still months away, was now clearly in sight.